Brother Michael Green, we know him, not all. Someone told me, I just met him today, I said, greet me again and again. You are the Michael Green I've been hearing about. So Brother Michael Green is a Marist scholar and writer. He has been a Marist brother for almost 50 years. I asked him this morning, he said, next year I will celebrate 50 years of religious profession. I said, God, I wasn't even born when he was professor.
Oh, not
But I'm foreign. So he's been serving as a teacher, a secondary school principal, a supervisor of school, university college, a rector and author, and I would say course presenter. In 2010, he became the first national director of Marist School in Australia, which comprises a network of 56 Marist schools, and a position he held for 8 years. Brother Michael Green's studies have been in the disciplines of history, theology, scripture, and education. Actually, his doctoral degree, his doctorate, which explored the culture of Australian Marist schools, brought together the anthropological concept of culture and the theological dynamic of charism. He has a special interest in the ways in which the spiritual families of the church can contribute to its vitality and renewal. His 2018 book, because I said he's also a writer, Now with Enthusiasm, Charism, God's Mission, Catholic Schools Today, crystallized more than 2 decades of his scholarship in this area. Among his other books, as Marist, we have Marist Education, Its Vitality and Potential, 2011, Dawn's Uncertain Light, The History of the Marist Brothers, Volume 3, 2016, Historical Sources Reveal of Its Essence, Marist Education, Creative Fidelity to Its Sources, 2021. I would say that, like André Lanfray, who is here, whom the Institute considers as our official historian, I think we should also, and absolutely, mention Michael Green as one of the giants when it comes to our Marist history and spirituality. We all know that he wrote with the latter with André Lanfray, a recent history of the Marist brothers. Some of his reflections and articles have disrupted our familiar ways of thinking, of conceiving, and living our Marist life. Over the years, Brother Michael Green has helped demythologize or separate the fiction from the facts, and he has helped the Marist to set our priorities on what is essential and avoid being deceived by myths. For instance, his article, The Montagne Myth, helped discover the real boy of whom Champagnat said, un enfant malade au pied du Pilat, a sick child at the foot of Mount Pilat, which we found in Jean-Antoine Bourdain's memoir. Brother Michael Green served on his provincial council for over 20 years, as well as the Joint Mission Council for the former provinces of Sydney and Melbourne. And he has been on the council of the Marist Association of St Marcellin Champagnat since its beginning in 2015. The Marist Association has taken over from the Brothers Province the management of all Marist educational and other ministries across Australia. But since 2004, he has been a member of the International Commission for Marist Spiritual Patrimony, as Brother Antonio, our chair, mentioned here. And he championed the course here at the General House in 2008, where some of us were introduced to serious research around our spiritual patrimony. And he later helped set up, with all of us who graduated from that course from Africa, a team that organized workshops in formation houses across the African continent with a systematized course for the different stages of initial formation in Africa. Thank you for that, Brother Michael. And to finish, he has been a member of other commissions for the Institute, including the one that looked at the new models of governance and management of Marist Life and Mission. Brother Michael is currently based in Sydney, Australia, where he is the community leader of a large brothers community. They are 15, eh? And not 95 like mine. They are 15. The community leader. And he serves also on a range of boards, council, and committees, and as well as involvement in Marist formation in various roles. Like recently, here at Manziana, the organization of the program of formation for the third age. Brother Michael Green, I'm sorry for being a little too long, but à tout Seigneur, tout honneur. So you are welcome.
Vincent, thank you. You said you would be short.
I tried.
Thank you for your welcome, everyone, and Marist friends. My picture was too long on the screen, so let's switch to Jesus. Let's begin with Jesus. And because it is Advent, began yesterday, let us begin perhaps with an image of the Nativity. This one from Rembrandt we probably know well. Rembrandt was a master of light, and the light here is on Jesus. Similarly with this painting, the light is on the crucifixion, on Jesus. But because it is Advent, let's stay with this image for just a minute. We can see that the light emanates from Jesus. If we look closely, we can see that Joseph is holding the lamp. We remember that Marcellin gave us Joseph as our principal patron. And like Joseph, we are called to bring the light where it needs to be shed, to bring the light where it needs to be. Friends, my subject today is really that idea, that our focus should be on Jesus, the light should be on Jesus. It's all about Jesus. As Marists, you and I are all about Jesus. And I think there are risks that take us away from that. And this will be what we explore this morning. And not only are we called to have a focus on Jesus, but in our spirituality we have a particular style, a distinctive way of relating to Jesus and for bringing the gospel to life. And at our origins, that style was decidedly affective, relational, and mystical. But more about that in a moment. First, can I just say a a word about when I use the term Marist spirituality, what am I talking about? From the start of our Marist project, and despite the common origins of the Marist family, there has always been more than one strand of Marist spirituality. That's not a problem. Rather, it's something to be celebrated. Let many flowers bloom. And that's a whole subject in itself, and not one for today. But today, as I use the term Marist spirituality, I just want to point out that I am referring almost entirely to the particular strand of Marist spirituality that grew from Marcellin Champagnat and the first Marist brothers, and which continues within the spiritual family that is associated with that founding story, which is most of us. I also mentioned that I have written a paper that develops today's topic in a lot more detail than we have time for just now, and Vincent will say how that paper can be accessed afterwards. It will be uploaded for us. But let's move on. Whatever strand of Marist spirituality we are talking about, or any other spirituality, such as Benedictine or Franciscan or Dominican or Ignatian or whatever, all of them are Christian spiritualities. And what do we mean by that? Well, all Christian spiritualities have at least one thing in common. And it is this: they have ways that people have found helpful for them to be the living memory of Jesus. Ways to come to an awareness of Christ alive within them, and to nurture that Christ life in others in their own time and place. Indeed, I would say that the measure of any Christian community, any spirituality that claims to be Christian, is how much its identity and its purpose are founded in Jesus Christ, defined by Jesus Christ, not by their founders. Not by their founders. At least not essentially. And that's where I want to go today in considering both the history of our spirituality and its present expression, and the challenges that it has faced and continues to face in staying true to our founding orientations. If we look at Marcellin, the one expression that he used was that he wanted the brothers to be, each brother to be a living gospel, was the term he used. It's a way of saying, I think, what St Paul said, to be alive in Christ. What do those expressions mean? Well, among other things, it means that a group of faith companions, such as us, a community of people of Christian faith, can incarnate the living memory of Jesus, can incarnate Christ's life. So it means things like we have a language that speaks to us. We have an accumulating wisdom, wisdom that continues to grow and to evolve, that gives us an insight into the gospel. We have a distinctive praxis, a distinctive way of doing, of ministering, of relating, that works for us, that speaks to the social, cultural, spiritual realities of our lives and helps to transform them. And we have a shared story that speaks to people in their here and now. And our Marist story does that. Like all good Christian spiritualities, it gathers us, it missions us. And we have always had words for that. In Water from the Rock, we use the expression of bringing Christ's life to birth. It's an expression, I think, that's quite distinctive for us. And we could spend a lot of time just on that expression. But my point is we have a language, we have words. And we have always had words. Really from the beginnings, before there was anything called Marist spirituality, before there was anything really called Marists, when Marcellin gathered those first young men together at La Valla, there were words on the wall. Most of us have been to that house in La Valla. So let us reimagine that scene, you know? A motley group of 6 or 7 with limited education from the local town and its hamlets. A couple of them men in their 20s, 3 youths in their teens, 1 just a boy, and Marcellin himself not yet 30. The conditions were poor and rustic, and Marcellin was teaching them how to pray, how to relate to God. He wanted to give them a basis for building their spiritual life. And where did he start? What did he put first? Did he give them rules to follow? Duties? No. We can see clearly from the expressions that were written on the wall that he sought something that was not dutiful or exacting in its approach, but rather captured them, even enraptured them, enraptured their hearts. It sought to give them an interpersonal relationship with Jesus, a sense of wonder and of mystery that was both imminent and immediate, and joyful. God was omnipresent. Mary was integrally involved. And all of that, I think, is reflected in these little sayings on the wall. And from the start, there was no attention drawn to the person of Marcellin himself, but rather to Jesus. There was no personality cult or hero worship around Marcellin. And that spirituality, of course, grew quite richly over the next 3 or 4 decades during the Marist founding period. It developed a language, a style, distinctive emphasis, which in turn shaped a particular approach to education and the care of young people and to living as Marists. And it has continued to deepen and develop, and it is our grace today to be its inheritors. And to not only that, to be responsible for continuing the integrity and the vitality of it, both those things, integrity and vitality. And today among a much wider family of Marists than just the brothers. At the beginning, it was these things. It was a spirituality, I think, that was highly relational and effective. It was quite mystical. We'll see some of these things this morning. It was very heart-centered. It was very Jesus-centered. But I'd like to suggest this morning that it has faced 2 existential threats. 2 threats that really have threatened its vitality and its integrity. The first one, if we look at the century after Brother Francois handed over to Brother Louis-Marie the leadership. Roughly from the 1860s to the 1960s, I think it faced the threat of asceticism. We'll look at this word and this concept. And at its most extreme, this asceticism tended almost to be Pelagian. We'll look at that. And the last 60 years, I've just used a word here, stylism. It may not be the best word, but I have struggled to find another word. Perhaps someone here can suggest it. This is what a symposium is for. But we will look at what the threat here has been, and I think at its most extreme it has become cultish. So that's where we are going this morning. Now, one way into it, let's look at that first century. One way into it, and to look at where we started and how we started as a spiritual family, is to look at a book that some here may know well and others may not know at all. It's a book that was published by Marcellin's biographer, Brother Jean-Baptiste, in 1868. So that's 12 years after he wrote the life of Marcellin. And at the time it was seen to be what we would describe today as a sequel, as a twin volume. The book is far less well known today, which is a statement in itself, I think, because any living spirituality lives in a community and develops within a community. Ours did, and it does continue the same way. In the foundation period, certainly, our spirituality was not seen exclusively as the way that Marcellin Champagnat lived his Christian discipleship, not exclusively Marcellin. We'll come back to that idea. But let's first touch into this book. Those who are familiar with it would know that it carries 17 short biographies of some of the first brothers, each with a particular characteristic. We'll just look at the first three, just to dip into them. Brother Louis, Brother Jeanpierre, and Brother Dorothée. It's interesting that they are the first three. To me, it says something about the oral tradition of the time, that these three men were seen to be possibly very significant. Let's look firstly at Brother Louis. Now, Brother Louis Audras was one of the first two that moved in to the little house at La Vallar on 2nd of January 1817. And his particular trait, his particular characteristic in this book is described as love of God without measure, reflected especially in his personal relationship with Jesus. So this is the first thing that's mentioned, this characteristic. How this love of Jesus was lived by Brother Louis and how it was understood by Marcellin is in the book more nuanced and more developed than simply that simple expression, love of Jesus. An incident in the book tells us a great deal. It's an account of spiritual direction given by Marcellin to Louis. It's an intimate and intense conversation. The account of it in the context of this book is quite lengthy, so it was seen to be important. It reveals not only Marcellin's wisdom and skill as a spiritual director, but also shows the kind of spirituality that Marcellin sought to bring alive in Louis, whom he had chosen to be the director of the novitiate, and therefore who had a significant role himself in helping to spiritually form that first generation of brothers during the 1820s. So, we read a little bit from it. Do you love Jesus with all your heart, Brother Louis? Marcellin asked him. Do you love him with your conscience, Brother Louis? Do you love Jesus with your mind, with your will, with all your strength, with the sweat of your brow, as St. Vincent de Paul put it? Brother Louis, do you love Jesus with your words? And then the book tells us that each question was followed by Marcellin's developing what an affirmative response to each of those questions would mean. And the passion builds. Brother Jean-Baptiste describes Marcellin as being on fire. He pulls no punches. Then a very interesting question from Marcellin to Louis. Brother Louis, do you weep? Do you weep? He who does not weep loves Jesus but little. Blessed are those who weep. Marcellin wants to take this master of novices very deeply into himself, into his interior self. Then Marcellin comes again with the same series of questions, this time in rapid succession, like a boxer's jabs, left and right. Brother Louis, do you love Jesus with all your heart? Do you love Jesus with your mind? Do you love Jesus with all your strength? Finally, a telling blow. Brother Louis, if Jesus asked you, do you love me, as he asked Peter, how would you answer? Could you truly say, yes, Lord, you know that I love you? Brother Louis, we are told, was moved and touched to the point of tears by that series of questions. But Father Champagnat himself remained just as impassioned. Marcellin has brought Louis to a critical moment. He has been silent through the whole account, and now he's spent. And he responds with a cri de coeur. Oh, Father, he cried at the last question, I dare not assure Jesus that I love him, but it seems to me that I want to love him. I want to love him with all my heart. Desire. Marcellin knew that the spiritual life was all about desire and what we do with it. This was a key theme of St. Francis de Sales, arguably a favorite spiritual writer, possibly the most favorite spiritual writer of Marcellin. And Marcellin had embraced de Sales' spirituality. That Louis was getting in touch with his heart's desire, owning it, wanting to feed it healthfully. That's where Marcellin wanted to bring him. Marcellin was seeking to sate Louis' thirst, rather than thinking that it had already been done. Marcellin was not interested in self-righteous claims of spiritual perfection. Let's move to the second brother, treated in Biographie de quelques frères, Brother Jeanpierre. Most of us would know about Brother Louis. Not everyone would be aware of Brother Jeanpierre. He was the first brother, Jeanpierre Matinol, he was the first brother to die in the Institute in 1825. And a vignette in his biography points us again to Marcellin's intuition and the kind of spirituality that he fostered in those first brothers. It comes from the earliest years at Laval. So, young Matinol, just 20 years of age, and in the workforce for some years by that time, comes to join the small community at Laval in 1819 or 1820. And he is struck by the way that the brothers are a long time in silence each morning at prayer. And he's troubled that he does not know how to do that. We pick up the story. One day, Jeanpierre asked to Marcellin, "Father, can we pray to God without speaking?" "Yes," Marcellin responds, "but why do you ask me this question?" "Because every morning I see you and the brothers remain still for a long time, deep in contemplation, without saying a word. I understand that you are praying, but I don't know how to do this, which grieves me." Marcellin says, "And what do you do during that time?" Jeanpierre says, "I recite my rosary, and I tell God I give you all my heart and I love you." Marcellin says, "Well, you can continue well with that prayer, but I will also teach you how to pray like the brothers." And to the young man's question, how can one take actions without speaking? Marcellin responded by giving the example of a mother who looks at her child or thinks of her child with love, without needing to tell the child. "Yourself," said Father Champagnat, "do you not love the good Lord when you see a crucifix?" When the postulant answered affirmatively, Marcellin explained that in this way he could pray to God without speaking every morning, as did the brothers. The image of prayer as an intimate, loving relationship, a loving gaze. This is the disposition of a mystic, of a contemplative, indeed of a lover. Even though Marcellin is still a young man, he's already a deep sense that his spiritual life is an affair of the heart. And a quick look at the third brother before we move on. Brother Dorothée. So one evening, Dorothée is accused in a chapter of faults. There would be some here who remember chapters of faults. It was before my time. But during the chapter of faults, Dorothée is accused of being distracted at Mass. And the probably sanctimonious brother who admonishes him says that he noticed that Dorothée failed to turn the pages of his missal during Mass, but was amusing himself by looking at a picture. Father Champagnat, who is presiding at the ritual, asks Brother Dorothée to go to his room and to get the picture. And when he returns, he presents the founder with a little holy card that depicts Jesus on the cross. It is smudged and faded from being kissed often. Marcellin, of course, finds no fault and praises Dorothée for his unmeasured love of Jesus, to use the term that's in the book. Now, we may be tempted to think that Dorothée, as a young man in his 20s, still had a relationship with Jesus that was facile or sentimental or spiritually arrested. But Brother Jean-Baptiste preemptively assures us differently, because this incident in the chapter of faults is preceded by 3 accounts of conversations that reveal a genuine depth, real profundity in Dorothee's apparent simplicity. The first, which took place in while he was looking after some cows in the field, which was his main occupation, is with a visiting priest. The priest is initially dismissive of what he may have suspected were just rote answers from an unlearned cowherd. But the priest finally comes away thinking that, in his words, he has just spoken with a doctor of the church. The priest had asked him, "Where should one seek the love of God?" "In the heart of Jesus," replied Dorothée. "And how long do you spend each day in the heart of Jesus?" the priest continued. Dorothée said, "As long as I can, but always less than I would want." Desire and relationship. The second conversation is with Marcellin himself. It follows a reading at lunch, at the main meal of the day, from the Imitation of Christ, during which Dorothée seemed inattentive while this reading was going on. When he was asked by the founder, Dorothée confesses to be captured by a single feeling that the reading evoked in him. That feeling was that Jesus' whole life was an embrace of the cross. "These words made such a vivid impact on me," said Dorothée, I cannot describe it. Brother Jean-Baptiste goes on to say, no doubt reflecting Marcellin's own response, that Dorothée, like St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 2, knew only Jesus and him crucified. He busied himself only with Jesus. His passion stayed with him everywhere. As he worked in the fields, he burned with love. And the third conversation is also with Marcellin. One of Dorothée's daily practices was to make the Stations of the Cross privately on his own in the chapel. While Marcellin affirms this practice, he thinks that Dorothée might not be getting the most out of the exercise because he does not use a book or any written prayers. But Dorothée explains, at each station, I simply contemplate Jesus before my eyes. Then I tell him that I love him. Marcellin is reported to have had nothing to add or to suggest to Dorothée. He said Dorothée didn't need any written aid. His method was excellent. Marcellin was obviously more concerned with Dorothée doing the right thing rather than doing things right. Let's move on to consider the different approaches to Marist spirituality adopted by the three men elected to succeed Marcellin in leadership. We know them well, Francois, Jean-Baptiste, Louis-Marie. Despite their efforts to project an image of unity, I would suggest that they were not really on the same page, at least when it came to how to develop the spiritual life, as Marcellin would have wanted. But they're significant. Each of these three men was significant in shaping or trying to shape Marist spirituality. Why? Because they were the leaders. Many in this room here this morning are leaders. If spirituality exists in a community, obviously the leader of the community has a very significant role to play. So, what about these men? Well, they were different. Brother Francois, I would suggest, was closer to Marcellin. His approach was more relational, more effective, more mystical. Jean-Baptiste and Louis-Marie, more ascetical, more concerned with duty, about what you do. I don't want to be too simplistic about this or too binary about it. Each of these men knew Marcellin and the founding community well. Each of them was intelligent, well-read. Each of them undoubtedly had a deep spiritual life and a great love of Jesus. They just had different ways of going about it. Quite different, actually. We're not going to spend any time this morning on Brother Jean-Baptiste. We could spend a whole symposium on him. But if you look at some of the things he wrote, and he was the main author of most of our original texts. You take the rule, for example, or the constitutions. They're full of things to do, of duties, of practices. Even much later, just before he died, and he wrote the book on meditation, how to go about meditation. Meditations on the incarnation, the passion, the Eucharist, the crib, the cross, the altar. It's more about what you do, how you do meditation. Similarly, in the book for which he is best known, I guess, today, The Life of Marcellin, the second part of it has one chapter after another on qualities, or to use the language of the time, virtues of Marcellin. And that's rich enough in itself, but there are two problems with how he goes about it. One is, it's very much about the acquisition of virtue, how you climb the ladder of holiness, what you've got to do to reach perfection, which was not Marcellin's approach. And secondly, I'd suggest that it's just a list of things. It's not really an integrated or synthesized understanding of our spirituality. I think Jean-Baptiste was more a curator, or more a collector, than someone who really could cohere themes and ideas. But Francois was. He also wrote. He wrote a great deal. Dorothée here, our archivist, has down in the archives a whole collection of his writings. And there are a lot there. We have his notes, we have his letters, we have his journals, we have his circulars. One thing we have is are his retreat notes from the very first retreat that Marcellin gave him in 1819, when he was just a boy. Quite interestingly, Francois had these retreat notes later copied and bound into a book. He wanted us to read them. He wanted them to be kept and studied. It's the story of a lifetime spiritual journey, but it remains, it has not been critically studied. Perhaps a doctoral research project waiting to happen. Anyone? But I want to mention one thing that he did write, which again has come to be called the Circular on the Spirit of Faith. Sadly, it is also largely unknown among us, yet it's one of the great treasures of our founding period. Francois wrote it in 4 parts. It's the first circular on a theme. Up until then, circulars had just been administrative. If you look at the dates, you see that it predates most of our early texts. And its aim was very clear. Brother Francois wanted to describe what was most essential, what was most distinctive about what he called the spirit of the Institute. It's really the first synthesis of Marist spirituality. What did it mean to be a Marist? We could spend the whole symposium on this document. We'll just touch into it today. But what strikes a modern reader, once you strip away all the 19th century language and ideas, if you go to the heart of this document, it's extraordinarily centered on Christ. There is no mention of Marcellin. Not once. Not a single time. There's only a moderate mention of Mary, and where Mary is mentioned, it's more about living in Mary's spirit, being as Mary. His theme, rather, is Christian discipleship. The term he uses is spirit of faith, but he defines spirit of faith as being a disciple of Christ. So what is he saying? And he would have only got this from Marcellin. What is he saying? He's saying that the most essential thing about being a Marist is to be a disciple of Christ. And if you look at the language, and we'll look at some of the language in a minute, there is a really consuming love of Jesus here. It's very affective, very personal. It's not about duty, it's not about doing things. It's about bringing Christ alive in ourselves. Look at just some of the parts. These are all taken from the fourth part of the circular, which I think is really the sharpest theologically. I read it. We may sum up by saying with the apostle, that's with Paul, that this virtue of the spirit of faith, this virtue, Christ will be formed in us. He quotes from Galatians. He quotes a number of times from Galatians, and I think one of the real insights into our early spirituality is the letter to the Galatians. And we shall live in him and by his Spirit, from 2 Corinthians. Or this. Let us spend our meditations in searching and penetrating the teachings of Christ, appropriating them, making them, as it were, part of ourselves, as if they had been written for us alone. It is thus that the thoughts of Jesus will become our thoughts, that our judgments will conform to those of the Divine Master. We shall truly enter upon the life of faith, the life of the Son of God himself. Then he quotes from Galatians, and he adds to it. I live now, no, not I, but Christ lives in me. And then he adds, thinks, judges, loves, hates, does all in me. This is not about an uncritical imitation of Christ. It's about coming to a sense of Christ within. There's a difference. Well, the spirit of prayer and the spirit of faith are one and the same thing. In other words, discipleship of Christ, which is how he describes spirit of faith, is the same as the spirit of prayer. A person of prayer will ever be a person of faith. The great source of the spirit of faith is Jesus Christ. The great secret to acquire, preserve, and perfect this virtue within us consists in approaching nearer to Jesus Christ. Our chief occupation in prayer, therefore, should be the study of Christ. And then, how personal is this? Oh, if once we had entered deeply into the heart of Jesus and tasted a little of his ardent love, we should know by experience what it is to have the spirit of faith, to live the life of faith, and all the things of the world we reject as filth and rubbish, to gain Jesus Christ and possess him alone. I recommend this meditation in a special way to each and all of you. And the reference to Philippians is clear. We're running short of time, so these other quotations will be in the article, and also this from his notebooks. But you get a sense that of the depth and the very personal relationship that Francois has. Louis-Marie, different. Now, Louis-Marie, some people describe him as a little bit imperious and ambitious. Certainly he was ambitious for the Institute. He certainly had no doubt about the importance of his position, and he wanted to influence how things developed. He wrote 22 circulars. His themes are very different. He has themes like this. He emphasizes the ascetical nature of things, discipline, fidelity to the rule, keeping the rule, being regular, being obedient. He even put a bit of fear into it. Don't do these things and you'll end up in hell. So different from Marcellin. One of the first circulars he wrote was on formation, and what did he think was needed? Well, what we need in formation, he said, is more rigor and more stricture and higher expectations of those in formation, and they need to earn their merit. They need to prove themselves. They need to move towards perfection. In the previous year, there was published a new novitiate manual, The Principles of Christian and Religious Perfection. And he wrote an introduction to this, a foreword to it, and he said, this book will make it very easy for novices to become good Marist brothers. All they have to do is learn the answers. And there were 982 questions and answers. And by 1934, there were 1,495 questions and answers. Part 4 is interesting of this manual. It says how you become perfect, how you practice this perfection. There are 8 parts to it, 8 chapters in this section. Only 2 of the 8 chapters are on Jesus, and only then on knowledge of Jesus. And the other 6 chapters are about all the devotions and the practices and the sin and temptations that have to be overcome, and exercises of piety and keeping the vows and the virtues to develop. It's just a different approach. Then we have an interesting set of circulars, which are 4 circulars, which are sometimes called the Pontmain circulars. Pontmain was a place in northwestern France in 1871 where there was a Marian apparition during the Franco-Prussian War. And this really affected Louis Marie, and he wrote 4 circulars on the basis of it. And it was really around how to pray, how to go about prayer. And what he emphasizes at the start is an explicit focus on what you do. And he's quite deliberate about it. He says we should start with the exterior because we need to master the senses. Once we master the senses, once we have what he calls earnestness and perseverance, they're the 2 bases of prayer that he suggests, then we will be able to develop a prayer life. He says this, that exterior recollection, practiced with courage, leads infallibly and even quickly to true devotion and the interior recollection which prayer demands. It's almost the reverse of where Marcellin started. You compare it to something that Brother Francois wrote. Well, it was a Sunday night conference he gave in retirement at the Hermitage. He's talking about prayer. Just look at the second half of it. About halfway down. Francois says, so it is not enough for us to pray once in a while or even often during the day. Prayer must become part of our very being, become incorporated into us, take root in us, become mingled, so to speak, with our very flesh and blood, so that, like the psalmist, our heart and our body may tremble with love when we think of the living God. That's strong language. It's very affective, relational language. Our heart and our body may tremble with love when we think of the living God. It's the language, certainly of a mystic, but a language of a lover. Now, 2 of Brother Louis Marie's later circulars, towards the end of his very long generalate, were on the mystical life of Christ. You think, well, here we go. There may be some some change of focus here. No, not really. He says what we've got to do to develop the mystical life of Christ in us is to earn sanctifying grace. It's Pelagian. He says we must struggle manfully for this. It's a combat, it's a fight, it's a duty. And how do we do it? Well, he offers 5 things. First thing, avoid mortal sin. Second thing, avoid venial sin. Third thing, fight against any small imperfections that we have. Secondly, do everything you can to please Jesus so you can gain him. And how you do this? You observe the rule. You do everything in the rule. And fifthly, you teach religion well. It's different. It's different in its style, different in its focus. And similarly in his last circular, we haven't got time to it, but it's very similar. Brother Nestor follows him only for 4 short years, and he doesn't write much, but he writes one very interesting circular in 1881 on the Sacred Heart, and it's very deep. It's very deep, both theologically and anthropologically. You look at this. He says, let us, because his whole thing here is, we discover the love of God in the love of each other. We see God in each other. He says, let us ponder Jesus Christ and study his heart. Let us love God in our family and our institute. Let us love God in our country, in each of our brothers, in each of our pupils. Let us love God in the poor and the ignorant. Let us love God in everything relating to him. Then we shall love all these more than ourselves, and we shall be truly devoted and humble. We could spend some time on this circular. It's a very rich document. He talks about 2 kinds of religion. He said there's religion without love and there's religion with love. Religion without love or without enthusiasm is constrained and it's anxious. It's laborious. Religion with love or based on love, he says, is to hear and respond to the voice of love, the voice of tears, the voice of blood, the voice of the heart of God. This is the school of the Sacred Heart. And it results in a loving delicacy, a softness, a sweetness in our spiritual lives. Brother Theophan didn't write very much on spiritual things. He wrote a lot about his travels of the world, and then other things were important for him. Of course, the secularization laws and the closing of schools and so on. But he did write something talking about prayer like an aromatic oil, composed of what is purest and most ardent, most divine. The spirit of prayer does not hamper the movements of the soul, does not create a constraint and a servitude in our heart. And it's closer to what Francois was saying, but he didn't write very much about it. And then he was followed by Stratonic, who wrote almost nothing on this. Stratonic, after he was elected, we had 10 years before the centenary, the 100 years. So in 1908, he wrote a circular, and he wanted to urge the brothers how to reclaim the original spirit, so we can get ready for the centenary. And what was his answer? Well, every community should have these 8 books, these 8 ascetical books: the life of Marcellin, the panegyrics of the founder, the biography of quelques frères, and some other things. And then the last one, the general directory. I'm not sure what was terribly inspiring about that, but he said every community should have this, and at the retreat, every brother should read them, and if you read them and study them, they will all have the original spirit. And he didn't have anything more imaginative than that to say. He offered no critical commentary on them. He offered no recontextualizing of them. And actually, by this stage, the generals had started to just repeat early texts, just represent them, not recontextualize them. So it's no surprise that they stopped being used very much. Then it gets worse with Stratonique. In 1916, on the circular for the centenary, he said, "We need to have the faith, the fervour, and the strength of Father Champagnat." Well, admittedly, it was the middle of the First World War, but it's strong language, masculine language, tough language. And he said Father Champagnat was the strong man par excellence. We have to be strong like him. Then he uses the most curious term. He said Father Champagnat had spiritual virility. How different is this from Francois? Then his last circular, he talks about battle and strength and Jesus as king, and it's hard language. What we can say is that during this 100 years, there was significantly inconsistent leadership of what it meant to be Marist, what it meant to be Marist spiritually. We went from origins like that, but other things, particularly through Louis Marie, and then later with others, not so much Nestor and Théophane, but Stratonique and others who followed him. It was more about doing your duty, obeying the rule, doing things exteriorly, earning merit. The texts were uncritically used and gradually went into disuse. So, we're running very short on time. Let me just jump forward a little bit, and I'll just briefly talk about the second point. We won't go into the same detail. During the last 60 years, starting with the beatification, Marcellin has been moved to the centre. You look at this book, for example, published in 1961 in Canada, called Meditations at the School of Blessed Marcellin Champagnat. Marcellin now has become a focus, a reference point, a way of learning how to pray. It's different. You look at the very first article in this little booklet. It says this. It says, Article 139 of the new edition of our rules tells us that the brothers will regard and love their founder as their spiritual father, their model and protector. They will reach a full flowering of their vocation only if they have a sincere devotion to him, comprising of love and veneration. And then there are, it talks about Marcellin with these things, and then it goes through a whole set of meditations. The themes are not strange; they're familiar themes, but Marcellin is the one that is used as the reference point. There are 32 meditations. Mentions of Champagnat or the founder appear over 200 times. More than twice as many as Jesus. And references to Scripture are almost absent. Now, we needed to reclaim, we needed to reinterpret. the founder, and there was lots of scholarship, both in the Marist brothers, the Marist fathers in particular, some great scholars, and we're very indebted to them, you know. But there is a question of balance, and how did we have this balance right. There are new biographies, new research, new critical commentary, and we're very familiar with all of that. Two significant events. One is in 1989, the bicentenary of Marcellin's birth, and the canonization 10 years later. Brother Charles declared 1989 as the Champagnat year. There was a new edition of the Life. Every brother received a copy. 2 years earlier, there had been the Champagnat movement, or the Marist family started. 10 years later, the canonization and all that went with that, another biography. 2 years before that, the new education document, in which Marcellin was described as the life-giving root. Marcellin as the life-giving root, and we as disciples of Marcellin. Art, images, there were plays, there were musicals, there was, you know, and we're familiar with all of that. We sing those songs, we do all of that. But one point, and I'll move towards a conclusion, one point that I don't think has been we're sufficiently studied is that when all of this heightened attention was being given to Marcellin, particularly during the 1980s, 1990s, the early 2000s, this was the very same time that we were welcoming a wider group of Marist people. We were widening the space of the Marist tent. This is the moment that those people came into the Marist family in a conscious way, and they were naming and claiming the Marist way as their own. Marists were a bigger family. I ask this question, what was the self-concept of the Marist world into which they were being inducted? I think it's an important question. And there are people here in this room who would have joined the Marist family at that time. What was the balance of our sense of being Marist at this time? To what degree has the love of Jesus and his gospel been the primary orientation at this time? There's always a danger, I think, when any group has such an inspiring founder, that there's a danger of developing a personality cult around the founder. Something that can supplant the gospel or Jesus. At its extreme, I think, it can be a commodification of charism, as if charism is a thing. Charism is not a thing. Charism is the Spirit's giftedness of each of us. It's not something you get or you have or you bond to even. But what are we disciples of Jesus, you know? Has there been, or to what degree has there been a triumph of style over substance? It's a question that I ask, deliberately provocative. Let's, I think that this just did not happen in the 1820s and 1830s. But the way that we have celebrated Marcellin in the last few decades, I think at least raises a possibility of its happening. I think it's important that we look critically at our language, at our emphases, at the way we understand ourselves and describe ourselves, the names we use for ourselves. Even a name like Marist of Champagnat, we can be sure that Marcellin would not have been comfortable with that term. He never sought to have his brothers have their identity defined by him. And what of our hopes, our resources, our iconography, our music, our formation programs, our emphasis with young people? To what extent do they remain Christocentric? As Christocentric as Francois. When Brother Basilio reached the end of his generalate, he wrote a long circular called Fidelity. And he invited brothers in the Institute to write to him as to why they remained faithful. And over 900 of them did. And he tried to synthesize what they told him. But at the beginning of this circular, he asked this question. He wanted to find this out. Were the brothers being faithful to a thing or to a person? Fidelity to what or to whom? Were they just being faithful to the Institute and the culture of the Institute? Or were they being faithful to Jesus? Some years later, one of his successors, Brother Sean Salmon, wrote a circular on spirituality. He asked a similar question. On whom or on what do we set our hearts? They follow in the tradition of Francois. And Francois is quoting from Galatians, I live now, no, not I, but Christ lives in me. Thinks, judges, loves, hates, and does all in me. So, my friends, I think we need to be aware that these existential threats towards asceticism, towards stylism, these risks linger with us. And I think it behoves us. We have a responsibility as Marist scholars, as Marist writers, as formators, as animators, as leaders, as teachers, to ask these questions of ourselves and of our Marist family. What are our emphases today? What are we writing about? How are we writing it? What are our focuses in research? What art do we have? What music do we write? Marist music. What's the structure of our formation for Marist life and mission? For Marist brothers, for Marist lay people? How do we name ourselves? What's our collective self-image? How clearly do all of these things give both voice and vision to our identity and purpose? We have a responsibility, I think, as thinkers, as writers, as leaders. I'm attracted to this latest painting of the artist we know as Goyo, because Jesus is back. Jesus frames Marcellin here. Marcellin is in visual relationship with Jesus. Marcellin is situated within Jesus. It defines him. It brings to mind, I think, something quite powerful that, and a phrase that we know well from Marcellin. To make Jesus Christ known, to make him loved, this is the whole purpose of your vocation. If we were to fail in this, our congregation would be useless. So let's finish where we began with Rembrandt. Where is the light? and with the words of our document, Water from the Rock. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Mike. I think we can give him another round of applause. A round of applause. Applaudis. Let me do like this, so no translation needed. How to thank you? Just briefly again, when you were speaking, I was looking at Brother Ernesto, and I was trying to read his mind. I'm sure he was saying, what are these people going to say about me in 20 or 30 years or 40 years? Now, for the time being, that's not our worry. You feed us and we take what you give us. So, Brother Mike, I would like to thank you. I think we have a little detail for you, but when we ask you questions, if we are satisfied with the responses, then we will give you. So thank you for helping us dive into the waters of our spirituality. Thank you for helping us set our priorities right, set on what is essential, set on who is the center of all this spirituality. Now we know whom it is about. Certainly not primarily about Marcellin Champagnat, as you presented here. The two main documents, the Circle of Faith, Francois, and even the apostolate of a Marist brother, two big documents summarizing our spirituality. First to be no single mention of Marcellin Champagnat. It means Champagnat knew that, and the brothers also, the first brothers knew that they were not to become clones of Marcellin Champagnat. We follow Jesus Christ. Our spirituality is Christocentric and mystical. And I remember we were at a gathering in Madrid in 2012, and the young people challenged all of us, brothers. You brothers talk too much about Champagnat, and sometimes we don't see Christ. we moved our head back and said, they are telling us something here. So thank you, Brother Michael, for this beautiful presentation that really makes us enter into this whole symposium. And now I will ask you, we have 18 minutes. No, let me not ask you anything. It has been too long. Oh yeah, but I would like maybe a couple of questions, then we'll break and go for lunch at 1, before we come back here at 3 to listen to another giant. So, Demosthenes, would you please help me with this microphone? And I'm sure there are questions. Don't be shy. Ask your questions. Oh, it was so beautiful and clear that you have no question. Yes. Antonio Amestaun.
Volviendo a las circulares que has insinuado, has subrayado, Michael, la del espíritu de fe. 8 años después de la muerte de Champagnat, 8 o 10 años prácticamente en el primer decenio. Pero mi pregunta es si has considerado 10 años más tarde la circular sobre la piedad del hermano Francisco. Ciertamente la piedad no aparece actualmente como un componente de nuestra espiritualidad. No obstante, en la vida del instituto la piedad ha tenido un peso significativo y habría que puntualizar las dimensiones de la piedad, no solamente los actos piadosos o los ejercicios piadosos o ejercicios de piedad, sino el contenido, la motivación profunda. Realmente la piedad significa una relación de hijo con el padre, del padre con el hijo. Por tanto, una dimensión más trinitaria que cristológica, pero una dimensión que creo que es muy enriquecedora. ¿Por qué aludo mi pregunta a la circular sobre la piedad? Porque es la última circular prácticamente de pensamiento que escribe el hermano François a su regreso de Roma, donde ha estado 6 meses intentando que le reconozcan las constituciones, pero al final no lo consigue. Pero ha tenido una gran experiencia en Roma viviendo de la piedad de los romanos. Regresa al Hermitage y allí hace una gran reflexión sobre la piedad y las vivencias que ha tenido. Y la pregunta está relacionada con el espíritu de fe, en el sentido de que en esa circular Francisco se muestra la dimensión mística de la espiritualidad marista. Y por eso te pregunto si has tenido en cuenta esta circular y si habría que tenerla en cuenta como complemento de la del espíritu de fe. Muchas gracias.
Yes, I think that the spirituality on piety is complementary to the circular on the spirit of faith, but and André Lanfray would be more able to answer this than I. But for me, the circular on the spirit of faith is more fundamental. It's more grounded in Scripture, and there's so many references to books of the Bible. You know, even in the first 2 pages, there's something like 11 references to Scripture, particularly to the New Testament. François is deeply centered in the letters of Paul, particular, but his knowledge of Scripture is quite profound. I think the trip to Rome and the was a different experience. You know, he was quite, and you have written about this, he was quite captured by visiting all the churches and everything that was happening in Rome and perhaps the spirituality of the time. So yes, it complements it, but I think the circular on the spirit of faith is more profound and more basic and more important.
Hola, me ha interesado mucho el tema del estilismo, que no lo había oído. Se trata de un problema del modo de ver y de acudir a Marcellino o de otra cosa diferente, porque cuando Marcellino, por ejemplo, habla de María, dice de ella, tiene siempre a Jesús en sus manos o en su corazón. Es decir, si yo tengo claro esa figura de María, siempre va a ser cristocéntrica. Si yo tengo claro el amor a Marcellino como el espejo que refleja a Cristo, no hay un peligro, no hay una exageración, ¿no? Entonces, el estilismo, ¿cuál es el problema real? ¿Cuál es el problema que los hermanos o la institución ha tenido de fondo?
I didn't have the translation exactly, but from what I understand, you touch on Mary and Marcellin's approach to Mary and the significance of that. I think we need to revisit a lot of Marcellin's own approach to Mary, not to change it but to for me, Marcellin was well, put it this way: Mary was for him much more of a companion. He could not imagine his life without Mary. Everything was with Mary. That was important. That was critically important for him. But I also think that it is important for us not to be anchored or restricted by the language and the spirituality of the time, of the early 19th century. We have available to us so much more theology, so much more Marian theology. That is the fruit of the thought of the church, the work of theologians, the work of spiritual masters. So I think it's good for us to bring all of that to our own understanding of Mary and of our Marist style. Yes, we have a Marist style. It's important that we do, because that's how we incarnate the gospel. That's how we give flesh and blood to the gospel in time and place. But I think for me a very important thing is to continue to develop and to evolve our spirituality, to develop fresh language for it that's faithful to our founding, but also speaks to our own time and our own place and our own circumstances and our own socio-cultural realities, and to the spiritual emphases of our time. So I hope that I've addressed some of what you have asked. Okay. No? Okay. We will talk later.
Yeah, brother say you have a longer conversation during lunch. That's what he said. So I think we can take one last question. I think so. Frère André Lanfray. Yeah, go there. Ready to come there. Le micro, André. Faut le pousser.
Ouais.
Voilà.
Voilà. C'est bon maintenant.
Bien. Pour la question de la circulaire sur l'esprit de foi, tout d'abord, le frère François en est certainement l'auteur, mais il n'est probablement pas, même certainement pas, l'auteur exclusif. Cette circulaire a été faite en 4 morceaux, de 1847 à 1853. Donc elle est composite, donc une œuvre collective, parce qu'on l'oublie trop. Les frères maristes sont alors dans la Société de Marie, gouvernée par le père Colin, et le père Champagnat n'est pas cité, en partie au moins, parce qu'il n'est pas encore fondateur, puisque le père Colin, étant supérieur, fait figure de fondateur. Donc Champagnat ne va devenir fondateur officiellement qu'au chapitre de 1852-54.
Et il ne faut pas oublier qu'on est encore dans le contexte d'une forte collaboration entre les branches de la Société de Marie. Les pères maristes sont aumôniers des maisons provinciales et notamment de l'Ermitage. Et la division en branches sera pour après. Donc, dans une large mesure, cette circulaire, elle parle de l'esprit mariste de manière globale, et pas seulement pour les frères, même si quand même il y a dans la circulaire des choses spécifiques pour eux. Bon, quant à Jésus et Marie, leur relation tout à Jésus par Marie et tout ça, je me dis c'est un problème à débattre qui est considérable, mais j'ai beaucoup apprécié ce matin que nous ayons une conférence sur la christologie mariste, ce qui n'est pas courant.
Thank you, André Lafray. I think he was responding partly to the question that Hermano Amestaun asked. ¿No has entendido nada? Que estaba contestado la pregunta tu pregunta sobre el circular de François. Sí, pero él también estaba diciendo, has añadido algo. He said that the translation didn't work well. I saw him listening to him so religiously, and I'm now surprised to hear that he didn't hear anything. Thank you all for the questions. Brother Mike, thank you again. The link, we can just give them a round of applause. Thank you.